May be peace, blessing, and mercy of Almighty One God on all of you, my dear friends, with the name of Almighty One God, who is most merciful and beneficent, and He doesn't have any partner. We were discussing about contribution of Muslims in medieval time in arts and science, and last lecture was about contribution of Muslims in historiography. And we ended that lecture about Ishaq, Ibn Ishaq, who was the first historian who wrote the biography of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in one, and he expired at 151 after Hijrah. So now we move forward. Muhammad bin Umar al-Waqidi, 130 to 207 after Hijrah, was the most outstanding historian of the 2nd century of Islamic era. He was a more serious writer than Madani or Kalbi and was the pupil of Hazrat Sufyan Suri. He is considered an authority in tradition, Islamic jurisprudence and history. He possessed a big library which was loaded on 120 camels when it was moved from one part of the Baghdad to the other. He was a prolific writer on various subjects. His special attention to chronology has been commended by Western writers. He wrote Maghzi, which dealt with the conquests of Uqaba in West Africa. His secretary Ibn Sa'd wrote the first classified biography dealing with the life of Holy Prophet of Islam and his companions. As the record of events were mostly based on the verbal reports of eyewitnesses or the persons connected with them, writers had to undertake extensive tours of distant lands, which led to the growth of travel, geographical and other literatures connected with the various regions. History has always been popular among Muslims, and during the 2nd century, people became particularly interested in the subjects. So this is what we talked about the Muslim historians in the 2nd century. 2nd century means Hijrah, after Hijrah. Now we will talk about the historians in 3rd century. The 3rd century of the Islamic era was a period of great intellectual attainments in the history of the Muslim Arabs. It was in that period that some of the brightest luminaries appeared on the horizon of Arab learning, whose light guided later writers in different branches of knowledge. One of the earliest historians of the 3rd century was Ahmad bin Yahya Baloridi, who died in 279 Hijrah. Like Tabri, he traveled extensively in the quest of historical knowledge. His two extant historical works are Fatahul Baldan and Ansab al-Ashraf. Buldan deals with the record of Muslim conquests and also describes the subsequent history of the countries concerned. His other book, Ansab al-Ashraf, which English we translate Book of Lineage of Nobles, which was originally printed in 40 volumes, is still in existence in Istanbul. The method followed in this book was to collect narratives dealing with the particular events. The division of history into episodes makes the author for backward as well as forward in times. I repeat, the division of the history into episodes make the author go backward as well as forward in times. This work forms a link between the separate narratives of Madani and the continuous history of Tabri. Abu Hanifa Dinawri was an authority on astronomy and botany and also left behind valuable works on mathematics, geography, philosophy, literature, and history. He wrote a work in 13 volumes on the Quran. Yaqut in his dictionary of authors gives a long list of books written by Danuri on diverse subjects. His Al Akhbarul Tiwal, which means long narratives, is a universal history up to the period of Muttasam. Another historian of this period, Abdullah bin Muslim bin Qutbah, 213 to 270 Hijri, was the Qazi of Dinawar. He wrote several important treatises on literary subjects including Adbul Khatib, which is one of the three authoritative works on literature, the other two being Kamil of Mugharrat and Bayan of Jahiz. His historical work entitled Kitab al-Ma'arif, meaning Book of Knowledge, is a storehouse of information about the holy prophets and Arab genealogical table. He also wrote Book of Sovereignty and the government dealing with the history of Islamic empire up to the term of Harun Rashid, Khalifa Harun Rashid. Ahmad bin Ishaq bin Jafar Yaqubi, a great admirer of the house of prophets, devoted much space to their wise sayings. His arrangements of facts by reigns is a more modern system than that used by the Tabri, who arranged his events chronologically. Ahmad bin Ishaq, chronological. Muhammad ibn Jarir Abu Jafar al-Tabri, 838 to 923 Hijrah, is recognized as the father of Islamic history and as one of the world's greatest historians. Born on Tabristan, the mountainous district of Persia situated alongside the Caspian Sea coast, Tabri is said to have learned the Quran by heart at the age of 7. He received his education at Ray, Baghdad, Wasit, Basra, Kufa, and Cairo. He made extensive study tours of Persia, Iraq, Syria, Palestine, and Egypt in quest of the knowledge and collect data for his historical works. On one occasion, he had to sell the sleeves of his shirt to buy bread. According to Yaqut, in volume 6, page 424, for 40 years Tabri wrote 40 pages daily. Yaqut says that Tabri was contemplating the writings of two books, a history and commentary of the Holy Quran of 30,000 pages each. But his friends advised him that human life would not be sufficient to write as well as to read through such gigantic works. Hence Tabri reduced the two books to 1/10, meaning by 3,000 pages each. Tabri lived for 85 years and died in 923 Hijri and was buried in Baghdad. Among his pupils was Ahmad bin Kamil, the person to whom Miskawi owes his guidance on history. Among his works on diverse subjects, the two most outstanding which influenced later writes are exhaustive commentary on Quran and his universal history. His commentary on Quran, comprising about 300 pages, is a standard book and includes the largest collection of exegetical traditions. His monumental work is the Universal History, which according to George Certain is remarkable, elaborate and accurate. All the books were eclipsed by Annals of Tabri, whose fame lasts up to the present time. The value of this book is very great. The author's selections of tradition is usually happy, and the most important episodes were treated with most fullness of details. Several translated and abridged editions of the Annals of Tabari have been published. One of these in 13 volumes was published in Leiden. His history begins with the creation of the world and continues up to 302 Hijrah. This was the first elaborate and complete historical work in the Arabic language and was the chief source of information and guidance for later historians, including Abul Fida, Taban Athir, Miskawa, and Ibn Kamal. He arranged the events chronologically, and his analytic method was followed by Waqidi, Miskawa, Ibn Athilan, Abu al-Fida. It said that the original work of the history was 10 times more voluminous than the surviving one. His other works include his voluminous legal treatise Ikhtialif. Others' work include his voluminous legal treatise Ikhtalif, comprising 3,000 leaves, dealing with the tradition of the Prophet, and Al-Bast, a jurist treatise. Abul Faraj Al-Isfahani, 897 to 967 Hijri, wrote Kitab Al-Daghani, a storehouse of information on Arab poetry, music, and archaeology. It's an invaluable work of Arab antiquity, which has been called the Register of Arabs by Ibn Khaldun. Arabic historian composition reached its highest point in Tabri and Masudi. Abul Hassan Ali Masudi, 912 to 957 Hijrah, known as the Herodotus and Pliny of the Arabs, introduced the critical study of historical events, and instead of grouping his events around years, he grouped them around dynasties, a treatment which was later elaborated by the Ibn Khaldun. He was very broad-minded and had a profound knowledge of the rise and fall of the innumerable dynasties of the world. He was also one of the first to make good use of the historical anecdotes. Masudi made an extensive study tour and wandered throughout the Islamic world in quest of first-hand knowledge, which enabled him to write his memorable work in 30 volumes known as Muruj al-Dahab. In this encyclopedic historiographical work, says Philip Case Heaty, the author, which Catholicity and scientific curiosity carried his research beyond the typical Muslim subjects into Indo-Persian, Roman, and Jewish history. His other notable work, Al-Tanbih al-Ashraf, outlines his philosophy of the nature and his theory regarding evolution. So here we stop this lecture, concluding the historians of 3rd century. In next lecture we will discuss the historians' work on 4th century. Please keep on watching my channel, Dr. Abu Abdullah.